or the interaction between places. This concept is highly connected to the geographic concept of diffusion, or how something spreads. So as we look at this today, terms and concepts you should be familiar with: space-time compression, diffusion, Hearth, relocation diffusion, expansion diffusion, which includes hierarchical, contagious, and stimulus diffusions, and spatial interaction with distance decay. So as we look at these, McDonald's is a great example of the idea of diffusion, and we could talk about it in different contexts. But the idea of diffusion, or the connection, is really how characteristics or ideas, information, knowledge spreads from one place to another. And through that, the concept of diffusion is how it actually spreads. And so when we start, when something spreads, it establishes a connection of some sort, in which we would examine as being called spatial interaction. So once something has spread, there's some connection there. How much connection can vary. And with time, what we're seeing with connections is that there's been a space-time compression. In other words, how something diffuses or spreads has shortened over time. And if we look at the idea of space-time compression through history, it's pretty evident. In 1492, Christopher Columbus sails the ocean blue, and it took him 37 days. Can you imagine being on a boat for over 5 weeks? In 1912, the Titanic, if it hadn't fatefully sunk to the bottom of the Atlantic, was going to cross the Atlantic in 5 days. In 1927, 15 years later, Charles Lindbergh flew from Paris to New York in a matter of 33 and a half hours. And then you had John Glenn, first astronaut to orbit the Earth. In 1962, he would have crossed the Atlantic in the equivalent of 15 minutes. So this idea of time-space compression, showing how quickly we can receive our transportation, allows us to get information or ideas to spread. If we want to take it to the most current context, the internet allows us to see things real time. Now, we might not be able to physically go there yet, but we can transmit information or diffuse information very quickly. So this concept of diffusion, again, is just the process of which ideas, information, or various characteristics are going to spread across space from one place to another. There's carriers to diffusion, or that allow this to happen, and there's also barriers. But if we look at the different types of diffusion, like, for example, the K-pop hit Gangnam Style by Psy, there was a hearth, or it originated in South Korea, and then through YouTube and various means carriers became a worldwide phenomenon, and was, at least at one time, was the most watched video of all time on YouTube. And it led to him giving concerts and traveling the world, and again diffusing his music and K-pop as a genre of music. So as we identify the different types of diffusion, there are a few different kinds, all under this idea of expansion. And just the big idea behind it is that the idea or the concept or knowledge itself is moving, and that is something that is transmitted through contact usually, but how that contact is diffused is different. So we have contagious diffusion, like a disease. That's the most commonly used reference, that when someone has a cold or a flu and you come in contact with them, that the flu is transmitted, or there's oftentimes those carriers make it contagious. Hierarchical is similar to contagious diffusion, but it's not. It's a little bit more arbitrary, in the sense that it usually comes from a place of hierarchy. So you look at the image to the right, you see this idea of there's a hearth, and then you're seeing some diffusion through usually through something or an entity of importance. For example, Lance Armstrong, when he started the Live Strong campaign with the little yellow bracelets, he was a known figure that allowed for that idea to spread. Or if someone famous wears a new kind of outfit or starts a new fashion trend, it's hierarchical because people see that and it diffuses because of that person of importance. The third kind of expansion diffusion is stimulus diffusion, and that idea is when we see something like Apple, a big part of PC computing or Windows-based computing is using a mouse. Well, the mouse was actually developed by Apple initially, and the stimulus diffusion is that Microsoft took that, adapted it, and it became a core component of most personal computing today. So something that happens constantly, where something is innovated to create something else. The other type of diffusion is relocation, and that's where we see something, the person or the concept itself moves. It's not transmitted and shared. It physically moves. And so an example of this from one place to another would be something like the euro. In this particular example, this was the euro in France. When it was introduced in 2002, they were polling and seeing these ISO lines represented the number of purses that actually had euro coins. And so in February 2002, the relocation diffusion of euro coins into throughout France was limited. And until you move later into the year, about 9 months later, you see a significantly higher number of purses that had euro coins, which would have been, again, a good example of relocation diffusion. When we have diffusion, what that creates is this idea of spatial interaction. That now that things are connected, whether it's an idea or a transportation network, people are more likely to interact, and more ideas are going to be shared. And the further away you get, the idea of distance decay is something that's still very relevant and present, but it's maybe not as significant as it was before because we are more connected. But the idea is that certain ideas or phenomenons become less important the further they are from their origin. And so just a quick, if you were to watch this video, this is actually looking at the spatial interaction or the connection of people throughout the world. That this is an actual representation or video showing all the flights that travel through the world in a given 24-hour period. So as you watch this, it's mesmerizing to see where this interaction takes place. And it's probably not surprising to you that you start to see a majority of that communication or those connectedness between North America and Western Europe. There's a lot of interaction. You see a lot of it even in Eastern Asia. But you don't see as much in places like Africa and the interior of Australia. And part of that is or Siberia and parts of eastern Russia. Part of it is because there's very few people there, but two, they're more isolated. There's less interaction that's happening in a spatial context. So while that's mesmerizing, you can find this video actually on YouTube by just looking up 24-hour flight patterns if you're just curious or wanted to show it again, or you could just show it again from this presentation. Other barriers to diffusion, just to be aware of, we're not going to go over these a ton right now, but you can see physical barriers like landscape, whether it's mountains, rivers, deserts, bodies of water, or cultural barriers, language, belief systems, religion, social norms that are less inclusive or create ideas from spreading. So, looking at the terms and concepts from this video, hopefully you can go back and at least give a basic definition and understanding of these concepts. Again, for your Cornell notes, let's keep that in mind, that the goal is to avoid just what is questions, but to try to identify a more encompassing, overarching question that highlights these ideas. And again, I'm not looking for perfection right now. We're looking for evidence of thought, of trying to formulate a question that you can establish that shows that you're trying to connect these ideas into a bigger context.